She was the voice that made pain beautiful, the woman who sang heartache into gold records and helped build the foundation of modern country music. But on one cold, cloudy night in 1963, Patsy Cline boarded a small private plane and never came back. The headlines called it a tragic accident. The music world mourned, but behind the public grief was a web of questions, eerie coincidences, and chilling last words that never made the papers. Why did she insist on flying despite warnings? Why did she speak of death in the days leading up to her final performance? And what did rescuers find in the wreckage that was never fully explained? Now, after decades of silence, newly uncovered evidence and eyewitness testimonies are painting a far more disturbing picture. The truth about Patsy Cline's last night isn't just heartbreaking. It's terrifying, and what you're about to hear will change the way you remember her forever. Before the tragedy, there was the climb. Born Virginia Patterson Hensley in Winchester, Virginia, 1932, Patsy Cline wasn't born into music royalty. She clawed her way there. Raised in poverty, she took her first steps into music by performing in local radio stations and honky-tonks. Her voice already carrying the weight of heartbreak that audiences would one day cling to. She married young, endured abuse, worked retail jobs, and kept chasing her dream. Her 1957 breakthrough hit, Walkin' After Midnight, put her on the map, but her career stalled soon after. Still, she didn't stop. She fought for better contracts, battled the male-dominated Nashville system, and earned the respect of her peers, not just as a singer, but as a fearless, no-nonsense woman who knew her worth. By 1961, she was back on top, this time for good, with I Fall to Pieces and Willie Nelson's Crazy, songs that immortalized her voice and expanded her reach beyond country radio. But that same year, her luck nearly ran out. On June 14, 1961, she survived a brutal head-on car collision that crushed her ribs, dislocated her hip, and threw her into a windshield. Doctors said she'd never perform again, yet less than a month later, she was back on stage, bruised, broken, but defiant. Some fans noticed a change after that, a weariness in her eyes, a deeper soul in her voice, a knowing kind of pain. In the months leading to her death, that unease only grew. She began giving away personal belongings to friends, dresses, records, keepsakes, as if she were preparing to leave. She told Loretta Lynn, "If I go now, I go knowing I did what I wanted to do." She wasn't being poetic, she was being honest. At home, she grew more withdrawn. She seemed restless, often pacing or scribbling letters no one saw. One friend recalled her sitting alone in the corner of a party, whispering to herself. She said something about not making it past March. He remembered, these weren't just passing thoughts. It was as if she knew something was coming, something final. And in March of 1963, when the call came to perform at a benefit concert in Kansas City, she didn't hesitate. Despite the weather, despite the distance, despite the dread, she packed her bags and boarded a plane for what would become her final show. But even then, she wasn't afraid. She had already said her goodbyes. Whether she knew it or not, Patsy Cline was singing straight into her destiny, and it was waiting in the sky. The invitation came from a grieving widow. Cactus Jack Call, a beloved Kansas City disc jockey, had died in a car crash earlier that year, and a tribute concert was organized in his memory. The lineup read like a Grand Ole Opry roster: Hawkshaw Hawkins, Cowboy Copas, Dottie West, George Jones, and Patsy Cline. She was one of the headliners. Her plane touched down on March 3rd, and she was checked into the Townhouse Motor Hotel. The night of the concert, despite grueling travel and rainy skies, Patsy walked on stage at Memorial Hall wearing a red dress and a fur-trimmed coat. And when she sang, the room held its breath. There was something different in her delivery, slower, more tender, like a woman closing a book. Witnesses would later say she seemed detached, calm. Her friend and fellow performer Billy Walker had offered her a seat in his car to drive back to Nashville after the show. "No, honey," she reportedly told him. "Don't worry about me. I'm flying." A local minister at the event recalled that after her set, she stood off stage quietly watching the other acts, not mingling. It felt like she was soaking it all in, he said, as if she knew it would be her last. The following morning, March 4th, Bad weather delayed the flight. She and the others were stuck in Kansas City for another day. Many saw it as an omen, but to Patsy, delays didn't matter. She called her mother in Virginia and promised she'd be home soon. "I'll see you Tuesday," she said. Those were her last words to her mother. By the morning of March 5th, the weather had improved slightly, enough for a cautious takeoff. The plan was to fly in stages, first to Dyersburg, Tennessee, then on to Nashville. They were flying in a small 1960 Piper PA-24 Comanche, tail number N7000P, owned and piloted by Randy Hughes, Cowboy Copa's son-in-law. Hughes wasn't just the pilot, he was Patsy's manager. But there was a problem. Randy was not instrument-rated. That meant if the weather turned, he wouldn't be legally or properly trained to navigate through heavy clouds or storms. At 2 p.m., they left Kansas City. The passengers on board: Patsy Cline, Cowboy Copas, Hawkshaw Hawkins, and Randy Hughes. 4 souls, 3 country legends, 1 underqualified pilot, and an aircraft with no business flying in worsening weather. But no one stopped them. No one said no. They were stars, invincible, on a schedule. They had homes to return to, shows to prepare for, families waiting. But as they left that tarmac, skies ahead weren't just gray. They were hiding something far worse. And whatever Patsy may have felt during that final concert, premonition or peace, would soon collide with the violent truth of what was to come. The skies over Tennessee weren't just overcast, they were hostile. As Patsy Cline and her group made their way toward Nashville, weather bulletins warned of high winds, low visibility, and a storm system thick enough to blind even seasoned pilots. But Randy Hughes was pushing forward. Their first stop was in Rogers, Arkansas, to refuel, then again in Dyersburg, Tennessee, around 5 p.m. And that's where things took a strange, fateful turn. At the Dyersburg Municipal Airport, Hughes met with an airport manager named Bill Brace. Brace would later testify that Hughes appeared concerned about the weather. Patsy didn't exit the plane. She sat in the back, quiet, motionless, eyes fixed on the tarmac. The airport manager begged Hughes not to take off again that night. He explained that the storm ahead was severe, visibility was dropping fast, and Dyersburg had no radar to guide them. "You're not rated for instrument flying," Braza reminded him, but Hughes waved off the warnings. He wanted to get home. His pregnant wife was waiting in Nashville, and the pressure to get Patsy and the others back safely was mounting. He called the Nashville FAA Flight Service Station for weather updates, but declined to file an official flight plan. That was his choice, and his final mistake. At 6:07 p.m., with daylight fading and a storm front surging through western Tennessee, Hughes took off. The Piper Comanche lifted into a wall of clouds. It was only supposed to be a 45-minute flight, but they'd never make it. Minutes into the flight, witnesses on the ground reported hearing a strange noise overhead, an engine sputtering, cutting out, then roaring back to life. One local, a farmer near Camden, said he heard the plane flying low and erratic. It sounded like it was struggling, he told investigators. Radar coverage was limited in the area, and the plane disappeared from screens altogether. Then came silence, a brutal silence. At approximately 6:29 p.m., the aircraft plummeted into the dense woods just outside Camden, Tennessee. It hit the ground nose first at a steep angle, breaking apart on impact. All 4 aboard died instantly. The debris field stretched 300 feet, with fragments of the plane and the bodies scattered and barely recognizable. Investigators would later determine the plane had spiraled out of control, likely because Hughes became disoriented in the clouds, a phenomenon known as spatial disorientation. Without clear vision, he may have thought he was flying level when he was actually banking sharply. And once the spiral began, recovery would have been nearly impossible in such poor conditions. But the most chilling discovery came from a simple object recovered at the scene: Patsy Cline's wristwatch. It had stopped at exactly 6:20 p.m. That meant for nearly 13 excruciating minutes, the plane had been airborne in total chaos, and for much of that time, its passengers were alive, likely aware that something had gone horribly wrong. Patsy, who had survived a car crash, built a career from ashes, and defied every odds stacked against her, had no way out this time. The very thing she feared had finally found her in the clouds. The crash site was hidden deep in the woods, just outside Camden, Tennessee. It would take hours before anyone realized what had truly happened in the sky that night. Back in Nashville, people waited anxiously for news. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the plane had made it. Others whispered that it had gone down. But no one knew for sure until the morning of March 6th, when search crews finally stumbled upon the wreckage. What they found was beyond grim. The Piper Comanche had slammed into a slope at nearly full throttle, nose first, with such violent force that it disintegrated on impact. Debris was strewn across a 300-foot stretch of woods, shredded by trees and burned by fire. The tail section had broken off. The wings were severed, and the cabin was nearly flattened. Investigators said it looked like the plane had exploded inward on contact with the earth. There was no cockpit left, just twisted metal and ash. The bodies were unrecognizable. Some had been thrown from the aircraft. Others were still strapped in, burned beyond recognition. Personal items were found scattered among the debris: an unopened suitcase, a broken lipstick case, a guitar strap stained with soot. One of Patsy's shoes was discovered yards from the main wreckage, resting eerily untouched on a mossy patch of earth. But the detail that froze everyone was her wristwatch, frozen in time at exactly 6:20 p.m. That watch told a story the wreckage could not. A story of minutes, not seconds, of slow descent, of terror, of a cockpit in chaos. One of the rescuers, a Camden fireman named Everett Langley, would later say, "You could feel it in the air. Something terrible had happened here, and it wasn't over quickly." For those who knew aviation, it was clear what likely occurred. Without proper instrumentation and overwhelmed by darkness and cloud, Hughes likely lost control of the aircraft. The plane may have entered what's known as a graveyard spiral, a deadly maneuver where a disoriented pilot unknowingly banks the plane into a tightening downward loop, believing they're flying straight. As the aircraft descends, it gains speed, and by the time the pilot realizes what's happening, it's too late to pull out. Passengers inside would have felt the lurch, the unnatural tilt, the pressure as the plane picked up speed. They would have seen nothing out their windows but darkness. They may have screamed, or prayed, or sat in stunned silence. There's no recording of their final moments, no black box, no final radio transmission, just a scar in the earth, and a silence so heavy it still echoes through a country music history. And yet, for all the horror, there was something chillingly poetic about where they fell. The plane came down in a clearing, surrounded by trees, but open to the sky, like a final stage, like the curtain falling on a show that ended too soon. And for Patsy Cline, the voice of heartbreak, that final descent wasn't just the end of a flight, it was the end of an era. But the questions and the haunting details were only beginning to surface. The Civil Aeronautics Board's final report arrived months after the crash, and it offered a tidy explanation. The pilot's attempted VFR flight into adverse weather conditions, it said, citing poor visibility, low clouds, and lack of instrument training. In plain terms, pilot error. But those closest to the victims, and especially to Patsy, were not satisfied. Questions emerged almost immediately. Why wasn't Randy Hughes, who was known to be inexperienced in navigating without visual cues, stopped from flying into a known storm system? Why did he ignore the advice of both the Dyersburg airport manager and the Nashville Weather Advisory, both of whom warned him not to fly that night? And why had there been no distress signal, no emergency broadcast, no sign of communication before impact? These were questions the CAB didn't dig into. They had their ruling, but for Patsy's family, friends, and fans, that wasn't enough. Over time, stories began to circulate. Unconfirmed reports suggested that Randy Hughes had been under intense pressure, not just from a tight tour schedule, but financially. He had reportedly been eager to prove he could manage and fly for Patsy without relying on others. Others whispered that the plane itself may not have been mechanically sound. The Piper Comanche had a solid reputation on paper, but some pilots questioned its performance in turbulent weather. One mechanic even claimed the aircraft had a history of electrical issues, though no formal records backed that up. Still, the doubts lingered. And then there were the eerie details that haunted those left behind. Before her final trip, Patsy had given away personal possessions, dresses, jewelry, framed photographs, as if she was preparing for something permanent. She told fellow performer Dottie West, "Hoss, I'm tired. I've had it. I just feel like I'm not going to be around much longer." At the time, Dottie dismissed it as exhaustion. Looking back, she wasn't so sure. More chillingly, a fan came forward years later with a postcard allegedly sent by Patsy the day before the flight. It read simply, "If this is the last time you hear from me, know I was thinking of you." Whether genuine or a fabrication, the card matched Patsy's handwriting and was postmarked from Kansas City. No official investigation ever authenticated it, but it added fuel to the fire. There were also rumors, unproven but persistent, that the plane veered far off course in its final moments, suggesting a malfunction of the compass or altimeter. With no black box or flight recorder on board, there was no way to prove it. All that remained was a field of wreckage, a stopped wristwatch, and a silence that seemed too purposeful. To some, this was a tragic accident. To others, it felt like fate catching up. Either way, the official answers only deepened the mystery, and one terrifying question hung in the air, like smoke from a fire no one could put out. Did Patsy Cline know she was going to die? In the weeks after the crash, Nashville was paralyzed. 3 country legends were gone in one instant, and the shockwave rattled the entire industry. But with the mourning came something else, something harder to explain. Whispers, chills, unshakable feelings. Friends of Patsy spoke of dreams where she appeared at the foot of their beds. Fellow performers recalled hearing her voice in empty backstage halls at the Opry, as if she were still rehearsing. Loretta Lynn, who had once idolized Patsy and became one of her closest friends, was among the first to speak openly. She said Patsy visited her in dreams for years, giving advice, offering warnings. "She told me not to let the business swallow me," Loretta claimed. She said she never got out. Skeptics rolled their eyes, but stories kept surfacing. Strange happenings in Patsy's Nashville home, radios turning on by themselves, cold air drifting through sealed rooms, clocks that stopped at 6:20 p.m., the exact time of her death. One visitor said she heard Patsy's voice softly humming "Sweet Dreams" from an empty bedroom. Years later, a musician who bought one of Patsy's old pianos claimed it would play single notes late at night when no one was near it. Even people with no connection to her told of sensing something at her grave, an overwhelming sadness that didn't feel like grief, but presence. Some began to wonder, was Patsy trying to say something? Was her spirit caught between two worlds, anchored by a story that hadn't been fully told? And then came the talk of a curse. Within 10 years of the crash, several other country stars died in eerily similar accidents. Jim Reeves in a plane crash in 1964, Otis Redding in 1967, Buddy Holly and Richie Valens, already gone, in '59. The skies that carried their songs also carried their ends. Some said the road was cursed for those who flew too high too fast. Others believed the music itself had become a kind of contract, one where fame demanded something in return. Cowboy Copas, Hawkshaw Hawkins, and Patsy Cline were dubbed the country music trinity, and their deaths became the stuff of legend. But only one of them left behind signs, notes, gifts, goodbyes, that hinted at something more. And only one of them seemed to echo after death. Even now, decades later, tributes to Patsy sometimes turn cold in the room, microphones cut out, lights flicker, and people whisper that somewhere she's still singing, still watching, still unfinished. Whether it's superstition or something darker, one thing is clear: her story didn't end in that field. Something carried on, and the deeper you look into her final days, the harder it becomes to dismiss the feeling that she knew, not just what was coming, but that it would leave a shadow behind her, a shadow that country music has never truly stepped out from. For years, Patsy Cline's final concert in Kansas City remained a ghost, remembered vividly by those who were there, but largely undocumented. No official footage, no televised broadcast, and no known recordings until 1993. That year, a private collector unearthed a forgotten reel-to-reel tape in a Nashville estate sale. The box was unmarked except for a fading label. Memorial Hall, KC, March 3rd. When the tape was finally played, silence gave way to history. It was her. Clear, haunting, real. Patsy's final live performance. The acoustics were raw. You could hear the echo of the hall, the faint coughs of audience members, even the rustle of a program in someone's lap. And then, her voice. Smooth, broken in all the right places. She opened with "Leavin' on Your Mind," her tone subdued but resolute. Between songs, she paused longer than usual. She didn't tell jokes. She didn't banter. At one point, she said softly, "Thank y'all for always being good to me, in case I don't get the chance to say it again." The crowd laughed nervously, not realizing they were hearing a farewell. Then she sang "Sweet Dreams," not like a performance, like a eulogy. Her voice cracked on the final chorus. She lingered on the last line, "Sweet dreams of you," as if she didn't want to let it go. But the most chilling part wasn't the music. It came after the applause. As the tape kept rolling, you hear footsteps. A chair scrapes, papers shuffle. Then, almost whispered, Patsy's voice, off mic, low and distant. "Lord, take care of my babies." The room is empty. She didn't know the recorder was still running. No one did. When the audio was played at a tribute event years later, audience members wept openly. Some walked out. One woman reportedly collapsed. A journalist who covered the event wrote, "It was like listening to someone walk out of the world." Experts verified the tape's authenticity. The voice, the venue acoustics, even ambient sounds all matched the setting and time. But the mystery remained. Why did she say goodbye like that? Why did she sound like she knew it was the end? And who was she talking to? Some say she was just emotional. Others believe she had a premonition. But among her closest friends, there was no doubt. They had seen the change in her weeks earlier, the way she started giving away prized possessions, the way she looked people in the eye a little longer than usual. She had tied up loose ends, and in that final recording, it was all there. Grief, resignation, and peace. What was supposed to be a private farewell accidentally became a lasting confession. And as that reel-to-reel tape spun to a stop, the last true living echo of Patsy Cline vanished into silence. What was captured was never meant to be heard, but once heard, it can never be forgotten. They said she died at the height of her fame, but what truly makes Patsy Cline's final night so haunting is how clearly she seemed to sense it coming. In the days leading up to her last flight, she wasn't panicked. She was peaceful. She gave away prized possessions, spoke of death without fear, and performed as if every lyric was her last. And then, after the plane went down outside Camden, Tennessee, and her wristwatch stopped at exactly 6:20 p.m., those who knew her couldn't shake the feeling. She had known. She had always known. Her death shocked the music world, but the clues she left behind were unmistakable. There was the chilling off-mic recording, "Lord, take care of my babies," accidentally captured after her last performance. There were the goodbyes no one recognized at the time, and there was the stillness in her eyes, reported by those who saw her just hours before the crash. Her final journey wasn't just a flight, it was a quiet walk toward the inevitable, and somehow that's what makes it all the more terrifying. Today, her voice lives on, not just in records, but in the space between the notes, in the silences, the unsaid, the unfinished. Her story became a warning, her music became a legacy, and her name became eternal. Patsy Cline didn't just sing about heartbreak, she became its most haunting echo. And though she vanished into the clouds that night, the truth she carried still lingers in the air, waiting for someone brave enough to listen.